we're creating about as many jobs as those other metros combined.
So Bend hates to be compared to Boulder.
We could have a whole hour conversation about this.
I think it sets us up another kind of foundation.
Participating. I think that's the difference between being a citizen or sitting on the sidelines.
These conversations are brought to you by the Ladd Group, Bend's leading real estate team. Help continue this Bend Beat conversation by subscribing, sharing, and leaving us a review. We are joined here today. It's Andrés Portela.
Andrés Portela.
The third.
The third.
Wonderful. Well, I appreciate you joining me. I saw that you joined the city, about 6 months ago?
In July, yeah.
In July. Well,
yeah,
welcome to Bend. Welcome to the city.
Thank you.
I'm glad you're here, and I've been researching and hearing a lot about what you're up to. I was actually just speaking with Melanie Kebler, who's the mayor of Bend, and she spoke very highly of you and a lot of the initiatives that you're working on, and I thought that would be those would be good subjects to talk about what's happening here in the city.
Solid. Thank you for
Okay,
having
but
me.
before we go any further, tell me about you. Your origin story, and maybe who are Andrés Portela the first and second.
So I'll start with my name story because
Okay.
I always ask folks, how do I get to know you? I start with the name story.
Okay.
My parents were like, hey, Dito. My brother's Ditto, number
Okay.
2. And so they were like, hey, what do you want to name your brother? And he was like, name him after me. My dad's first wife named him after my dad.
Okay.
So we all have the same name.
Oh, how cool.
Yeah.
I had one of my children give the middle name to the next child,
Yeah.
but first name. So are you close with your brother?
Yeah, my brother's my best friend. My dad's my best friend.
Okay.
My mom and I are really close. Like, we have a really strong family unit.
Well, thanks for sharing that. So
Yeah.
where do they live now?
So my family's all over the place.
Okay.
My siblings, there's four of us. They all decided to go to the military except for myself and my sister. My oldest sister, she retired 20 years in the Air Force. My brother, he's about to hit 20 years in the Air Force.
Okay.
My sister, she's in Miami working for Intuit, and I'm here in Bend, and my parents, they stayed behind in Southern Arizona.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, I'm glad you're here, and you're adding a lot of good initiatives and energy to our city, which are
Appreciate
sorely needed.
Yeah.
And I would like to start with your role here. So you're the Equity, Inclusion Director for the City of Bend. Tell us, what is that? What does that mean?
That's a really great question, and that's where I had to start when I got here.
Okay.
So I am not the first in my position.
Okay.
The Equity and Inclusion Department started 2 years ago.
Okay.
In my role, though, when I accepted the position, I started in July. I said, what's our definition? What is our shared language? So I spent quite a bit of time trying to figure out what resources were here, what resources were there, just as most folks do when they come onto a position, and realized we neglected to define equity. And so we spent quite a bit of time working with our Human Rights and Equity Commission, our Commission on Accessibility at the City of Bend, additionally working with our internal DEIA task force and with our counselors on how would we define equity. Don't have that off the top of my head, but basically what we are trying to achieve is look at how do services reach Bend residents, and do they reach them equally? So there's there's a difference between equal and equitable. Equitable looks at what are the barriers to accessing those resources.
Okay.
Not everyone has the same access. I think when we start thinking about built environment, when we think about social context, there's so much that goes into building an inclusive community.
Yeah.
And so how do we get the most inclusion into our community? We think about equity. We think about those barriers that it gets to full participation and engagement.
Yeah.
And so in my department, that's what we're focused on. We have a few focus areas. Our workforce. It starts at home. So we're going to be working over the next few years on how do we create a representative workforce that understands that this is a place you come to work, but how do we create inclusive practices? Yeah. Additionally, we'll be working on community empowerment.
Okay.
How do we get community to fully participate in all of the resources that the city offers while understanding the barriers to get them to using our services.
So not only is it, it's equitable and but it's accessible and it's attainable. Yeah.
Correct. I think the goal is to some point get to equality, but we can't get there until we recognize there's a difference in getting us there.
Yeah.
The two other focus areas we have are policy systems and environmental change.
Okay.
That's thinking about how do we change the policy
Yeah.
that once we get full participation, there's no going back.
Yeah.
And then additionally, strategic initiatives. And I can tell you a little bit about some of our strategic initiatives. I know you talked to Mayor Kebler,
Yeah.
who talked about our Strong Cities initiative.
Yeah.
We're also working with Leadership Ben on some accessibility resources for local businesses.
Yep.
It's really making sure we can create an ecosystem for everyone to fully participate.
Well, this is all very, very important work that's critical and crucial for the future of Bend and its residents. But it started in 2021.
Yeah,
How far behind are we?
that's a nuanced question.
Yeah.
So I don't like to look at it as a deficit. We're behind. I like to look
Okay.
at it. We're all on different journeys.
Yeah.
As someone who I propped up many of these spaces before, Bend is actually quite far along.
Okay.
But I wouldn't. There's not a starting line. It's
Yeah.
whenever we decided to opt in,
Yep.
we created the spaces for this work to thrive, and so we created the Human Rights and Equity Commission. We had someone installed in this position who did an amazing job on figuring out how do we compensate community for their time and labor they serve on our commissions to reduce barriers to participation with city services. So we've done quite a bit of work. It's kind of nuanced to say how far behind are we?
Yeah.
Because everyone's on a different journey.
Yeah. Well, that different journey is, it's how far out do you want to zoom and what perspective we put it in. And I'm new to a lot of these terms and understanding, so I'm going to make myself the public poster child of naivety.
That's okay.
And try to help share with people that are like me that are late to the game in understanding what diversity and inclusion truly means in the city.
Yeah.
And it started with a lot of self-education because when I moved here in 2011, I moved here, had open arms, and it was accessible to me.
Yeah.
And it really took me a while, and I was naive in that. I was leading my own life, trying to raise my kids, and to really broaden my scope of understanding of saying, did everyone feel the same way when they arrived?
Yeah.
Did they have the same opportunities that I did? Are they, and I've been slow to that game, and I think we as a city and perhaps state, especially when I look back at the state history of diversity and inclusion and what was written in our Constitution up until 2020, or no, 2002, was horrifying to me.
Yeah. So I'll talk about one of the misnomers I heard when I first came into this role. One of the misnomers that I heard was Bend's not that diverse.
Yeah.
It's a misnomer.
Okay.
Bend is quite diverse. If we think about accessibility, we think about sexual orientation, we think about gender, we think about race.
Yep.
Race being the things that we can see visibly.
Yep.
Numbers may be that we're between 86 and 89% white.
Yep.
But if we think about it, 1 in 5 Bend residents have a disability. When we think about our LGBTQ, when we think about other races, there may be a small number. However, it increases the diversity within our neighborhoods and creating such a rich environment. And so one of the biggest things that I've had to do is really defeat the misnomer. Start with that introspective work of like, what are some of the identities that we hold? In thinking about ableism or body type. And then how do we relate that to the interpersonal? That's implicit or explicit bias. So like, what are the things that come up when we're having a conversation and you see what I look like? And then moving from the interpersonal, we have to think about what are those interactions with local government? Are they different based on race, sexual orientation, gender, all of those different things? And then we have to think about the larger ecosystem. Bend racially didn't get this diverse, lack of diverse, based on a shot in the dark. It got that way because of sundown laws. It got that way. Well, Bend doesn't have formally sundown laws, but if you think about it, all the adjacent cities did. And so if if it wasn't safe for, and when I say sundown laws, it means folks of color could not be in that space after the sun goes down. And if we think about that, diversity of race would be hard to achieve if folks who couldn't be here after sundown couldn't be in the region. And so it's really doing that education. I think more recently during Indigenous Peoples Month or Native American Heritage Month, we started, we continued our Lunch and Learn series by having some of the folks from Warm Springs, a researcher who talked about Indian schools, come and talk to city staff and talk about how does government distrust lead to First Nations folks. And so that's our starting line. We're trying to figure out what is the historical context, how does it lead to current context, and what is the future of Bend that we're trying to build that is starting to look a lot more diverse.
Well, it's exciting, but it's uncomfortable, right?
And that's perfectly fine. One of the things I've really enjoyed talking about towards the end, when we give a conversation around diversity, equity, and inclusion, I ask folks, are your palms sweaty? Is your jaw clenched? Is your back stiff? Do you feel tired? Because those are all the things we feel in our body, and most times we don't name it. And talking about race can be a little bit uncomfortable, and that's perfectly fine. Understand why it feels uncomfortable.
I was just watching a documentary. I think it's called Premeditated Uniformity. Have you seen that?
I have not.
It's a history of all the exclusionary laws that Oregon had. I naively came, like a lot of people, into Oregon saying, hey, there's not a lot of racial injustice. It's not a very visual thing that we have issues. So Oregon's good. What I didn't understand is that premeditated uniformity that we had was predicated upon some of the most awful policies and laws around so many things that existed well up through the 20th century. And it brought us to where we stand now. And I think without the understanding of that, from First Nations to Black immigrants to Chinese immigrants that were here, building the railroads and where we stand now and how it was pushed out, and even dating back to some articles relating to the Ku Klux Klan in Bend in the 1920s. Those were uncomfortable things that I think help inform me on where we stand now. This uniformity didn't happen by accident. And where, so at least I could understand what's our starting line. Why does it look and feel and exist the way it is right now?
So I think that gets us where we're at in my role. So, like I said, I've been here for 6 months. My role I call this the year of the baseline. It's really creating those baselines in conversation, but then also creating that baseline in data. Spend some time in public health. And in my time at public health, I was the health equity director for Pima County. In that space, my role was to assess societal conditions and explain current contexts. And so to do that, we need data. We need robust data sets. And all that comes from is partnership. And so working with other spaces who may have the data, but then also relying on like census and so many different spaces that can tell the story. We were having a conversation about housing inequality a few days ago, and we were talking about how when we look at home ownership rates amongst white men, folks who live in Bend, and then you look at Latine, Black, and Indigenous folks, it tells two different stories, specifically around rentership and home ownership. And so building that baseline is important so that when we have these conversations on how do we provide education to folks who feel like their only option is renting, even though they may have the income or other factors that go into purchasing a home. My role is to figure out how do we bring the right partners into this space that can support either education or home ownership options, those sort of things. We work with every department within the city of Bend.
So this is a tall task.
It is a tall task. But it wouldn't be able to be done without community. I think pulling the Human Rights and Equity Commission, the Affordable Housing Commission, which I sit in every time they have a meeting, our Accessibility Commission, in so many different spaces, just being in space, understanding stories. In public health, we also talk about qualitative data.
Yep.
The numbers tell us a story. It's another thing for community to tell us the stories. I mention that because when I was working on the housing market study in Tucson, one of the things that came to me in conversation with community was a woman who described a story of how as late as the 1970s, her mom, who was recently divorced, was unable to purchase a home.
Okay.
And it was all through banks and lending to women who were single,
Yep.
and understanding the barriers to accessing resources. I say that to talk about an anecdotal story that then leads to policy change. When we talk about, and I keep talking a lot about housing,
Yeah.
because it's probably the most visible right now. We have a lot of housing inequality, or folks
Absolutely.
who are unable to access the market, either through purchasing, renting, or even being houseless.
Yep.
But it does move out to water service delivery.
Yep.
There's a lot of tribal sovereignty laws that you have to take into consideration. But yes, it is a tall task. Sorry.
And no, it's a tall task, and you're bravely and eloquently engaging with it. And I think I'm not sure if you feel it yet, but the city is extremely lucky to have someone like you, willing to dive in with this level of intelligence and understanding of these issues.
Thanks.
I feel like
appreciate
I'm
that.
about 20 steps behind you on trying to understand, kind of where you are at and what you're trying to do. So thanks for hanging with me.
No worries. I told my wife last night I have to try my best to not talk in squiggles.
Yeah.
Because sometimes I'll talk in this frequency that's like, oh, I love getting into the guts of things, but I'm not the subject matter expert in everything.
Yeah.
I really am going to rely on community input and really community help moving these things.
Yeah.
But then also the subject matter experts of the City of Bend staff.
Brian Ladd here. I hope you're enjoying the conversation and find this dialogue relevant to really what it means to live and work and play in this amazing community. As Bend's leading real estate team, we take our role seriously in representing both buyers and sellers at the absolute highest standards of our industry. For more information on how we can help, feel free to visit our website at bendpropertysource.com or text LADD1, LADD1 to 88,000.
Well, there's a lot of great staff and a lot of great engagement at the city. Are you finding that it's a collaborative, productive environment?
It is probably the most collaborative space that I've ever worked in.
That's awesome.
And I've worked in government, nonprofit, and private industry. It is. I don't think I was fully expecting how collaborative it was going to be. I make jokes. My dad was a community organizer.
Okay.
He was activated against government, specifically in our neighborhood. It fell between the boundary of city and county, so we didn't have sidewalks. And so my dad would show up at every city council meeting and saying, who actually holds this responsibility?
Yeah.
And so in that, you learn how to be small and scrappy. At the City of Bend, I'll say they're small and scrappy.
Yeah.
It is very much so pull in all the resources we have collectively. Let's all work through challenges and problems.
Well, that's reassuring to hear. And I want to dive a little bit deeper into Human Rights and Equity Commission and understand that a little bit more. But let's zoom back out one more step. So I want to learn a little bit more about you.
Okay.
Married?
I am.
And a kid on the way?
Kids, we're within
Kids.
within a week and some change. We are, the baby is due December 18th. We're in a holding pattern. Baby comes on baby's time.
So due December 18th. So you're week 38 right now, or it's go time?
Yeah, it is go time. I have been with my partner since I was 15. We've known each other almost our whole lives. I've known her longer than I haven't known her. And we waited quite a bit of time to have some kids.
Yeah.
And we're expecting our first, and I'm just super excited.
Well, congratulations. It's
Thank you.
a very special time. My brother just flipped into that, and he had his first kid. And he didn't take my advice. These last couple of weeks, try to sleep as much as you can, because you're going to go into a sleep deficit like none other.
Okay. I take advice very well. I'm like, yeah, I need it.
No, it'll be great. So are you excited to raise your family here?
I am.
What do you like to do?
Actually, me and my partner are homebodies,
Okay.
but we do like to get outside.
Yeah.
This is a wonderful space to get outside. We we're technically homebodies. We
Yeah.
play a lot of board games, but when I came out here for my interview, I joked around with her about there are so many kids on the plane,
Yeah.
and I just couldn't understand why there were so many kids on the plane. And then when her and I came to visit in looking for a home, we were at Munch and Music and we looked around and there were so many kids.
Yeah.
And we were like, where are their parents?
Yeah. Yeah.
And we were like,
Free range.
this is very much so different
Yeah.
than what we were used to. And I explained to her when I went to school in Germany, my senior year of high school,
Okay.
a lot of the kids were like that. The kids
Yeah.
would roam through adjacent cities. I lived in Meissen. I went to school in Dresden. And in that space, the kids would move throughout the space, either on the train or on their bikes, and it was always safe. When we got here and we were finally settled,
Yeah.
we were driving up towards this way from downtown.
Yeah.
And we saw kids walking along the river. And we were like, where are their parents?
Yeah.
But it very much so gave me the vibes of what I was used to when I moved when I was in Germany,
Yeah.
of the level of safety,
Yeah.
the level of communal care.
Well, that's great. I'm excited to hear that, and I'm excited for you. It's a very special time,
Thanks, I appreciate that.
and it's a good place. We've got a great birthing center over at the hospital.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what your plan is there, but
Yeah.
it's an exciting time for sure. So let's talk a little bit, because I didn't know about the Human Right and Equity Commission,
Yeah.
and you've alluded to some of that, but would you mind just kind of putting structure around that so I can understand what the main goals and initiatives of that commission are?
So at this moment, they're working off of a work plan. They have
Okay.
given us some work that they would like to complete. And in the first, I won't say that there's an order in sequence,
Okay.
but they're focused on collaborative governance. What are the ways that we can interject community in our everyday work? And,
Yeah.
and that's going to look like creating a framework, which is adjacent to two of their work plan items. So collaborative governance, creating a framework in which we see the City of Bend services
Yep.
through an equity lens.
Okay.
And then additionally, hate speech and discrimination.
Yeah.
This is probably the most moved item as a part of their workspace.
Yeah.
When I first got here, actually, I'll talk about the day after I accepted the position for this job.
Yeah, because we had some hate speech issues about the time you got here, right?
Yeah, so right at the day after I accepted the position, there was a situation in Redmond
Yep.
in which I had to have a conversation. I'm Black, coming into a space in which numbers are a little bit lower for that demographic, for my demographic.
Yeah.
And so I had to reassure staff that I was still coming. But then additionally, I said, these are issues that we are having. I then scoured social media and saw so many different spaces in which some tourists came to our space and experienced hate speech and discrimination.
Yeah.
And how do we create inclusive communities around that?
Yeah.
It's extremely hard to until we name it. And so the Human Rights and Equity Commission, we're actually working on that prior to me getting here. They've done an amazing job moving bodies of work. But in that space, we decided we were going to present some of the work that they've done in front of council.
Yep.
Council adopted some actions from that, which are create a repository, help council with discretion on how they can call out hate speech and discrimination, but then also provide resources and care for those who have been impacted.
Yeah.
But additionally, it led to the mayor going to an international group called the Strong Cities. I think they're a nonprofit. And they are focused on hate and discrimination. And they've chosen us to be a pilot city. And so as a part of the work that the Human Rights and Equity Commission hopefully will do, there's a chance that this is out of their scope.
Yeah.
But it's really a part of their work plan.
Yeah.
My hope is that once we present it to them, they will accept the Strong Cities initiative that is focused on hate, discrimination, and creating an inclusive community. That includes creating partnerships with community. It's looking at other mid-sized cities.
Yeah.
Where we'd actually be one of the first of 7 cities within the United States to take this international pilot and framework
Yeah.
and bring it to our mid-sized cities.
Well, that's amazing. I'm sure that was a challenging environment. I think it clearly laid out some of the issues that you're dealing with right away.
Yeah.
And it's great that you stepped up to the challenge. I that's putting a lot on your shoulders new to the community.
Yeah, and I think I'm just one experience. I think folks have all experienced moments of tension or discomfort, specifically around some of their identities.
Yeah.
I think Bend could be a better place in relationship to the larger narrative of hate and discrimination.
Yep.
So if we see something, we call it out.
Yeah.
Say that has no space.
Put a light on it.
Yeah, we don't want that in our city. Additionally, the city will be coming up with, we've already started internally, so we
Yep.
created some policy around our sponsorship programs to include safety plans that if this does happen at any City of Bend, not sponsored, but in partnership
Yep.
events, we have safety plans around the folks who have been harmed.
Yeah.
And so
Okay.
we're working internally. We're looking for community partners for the next part of that, though.
Yeah.
In creating community partners, we have to say as a region, this has no space.
Yeah.
And so over the next few weeks, we will be working on a proclamation with a few different jurisdictions on how do we say that has no space in Central Oregon.
So you're getting to policy. You're getting to
We are.
policy that creates dialogue and expectations of what we are as a city and what we're okay with, what we're not.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting to see a transformation from issues to policy that quick. That's appreciated. For those that want to lend support to these initiatives, as a citizen, that's a working citizen that's not involved in the city, where do they start? Is it conversations with neighbors? Is it engagement with specific policies at the city? What's the starting point? Or do you have any suggestions there?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I got that. We are currently looking for an additional staff member on my team, and one of the questions was, how do I start the formalized work?
Yeah.
And I think that's a nuanced question because we're all at different starting place.
Yep.
I think a great starting point is the personal. So the things that go on within our own heads, talking about the things that are a little bit uncomfortable with ourselves first, and then moving to interpersonal. Once we've done a good understanding of who we are, interpersonally, start to read some books, start to look at some literature that talks about how to move from personal to the interactions that we have every day with folks who have different identities than us. Additionally, once we move to interpersonal, interact with the equity department. We are always looking for community partners, whether it's small business to a variety of other spaces. There are some community levers that can be pulled there. The Human Rights and Equity Commission talks about all the issues that happen within the city of Bend with an equity lens. And there's public comment for that, so you can come and be a part of those conversations. The Commission on Accessibility affects all of us. And so there's space and shape for that, for everyone in Bend to join that conversation. But then also, everyone has a role, everyone has a job in which they can interact with the data work that we're going to be doing over the next few years. If you have data sets or have opinions, please talk to the equity department.
Okay.
We very much so know that this goes beyond just city services. I think I talked about our focus areas, but we have 3 core audiences. We have our elected officials, we have community, which is all of us, and then additionally city staff. And so the community part of that is we can't do our role unless we understand lived experiences.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about all 3 of those pillars there. Okay, wonderful. Well, I guess I'm trying to process all the initiatives and all the efforts that you're doing.
It's
and
a
you've
lot.
been here 6 months.
I've been here 6 months.
I'm a little bit dumbfounded and in awe of the breadth and knowledge that you're bringing to this subject that sorely needs attention and light and focus in our city.
My hope is that we will make it a good entry point for everyone.
Yeah.
And so we're starting that work. We will be publishing our roadmap by the end of Q1
Okay.
of this upcoming calendar year. So by February or March, we'll have our roadmap to say, how is the city embedding equity in those 4 focus areas I talked about before.
Wonderful. Well, you've already done a lot of good work. The storyline and the lived experiences of those that are new to Bend is they're always surprised at the welcome, generally how welcoming it is and how collaborative it is. I'm glad you're seeing and experiencing some of that. But I think it's in our DNA to continue to pass the mic and make sure that the next person, that's in line, that's here is, not only becoming part of the conversation, but becoming a voice in the future.
Yeah.
And, it's reassuring to hear that, we're working in that direction, that it's becoming a lens in which the city's looking at issues.
Yeah, and I don't think that I would be able to do my job so well if it wasn't for folks like the mayor, for folks who are on council, but additionally city management and staff.
Yeah.
They started this work years ago.
Okay.
The internal DEI task force, diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility.
Okay.
That work started with a work plan, an assessment, an employee experience survey. They've done so many documents on how do we change organizational culture to one, if we attract some of the best talent in the nation or even locally to Bend, how do we retain them and keep them here?
Yep.
And so I wouldn't be able to do any of the work without those folks starting that work before I got here.
Yeah, a lot of groundwork has been laid. It's always interesting to see how ambitious the city is. Mm-hmm. When their role is public, the basic public services, the ambition they have for issues outside of keeping the streets plowed and water coming to your faucet.
Yeah.
It's always reassuring to see that, and I'm always in awe of what's going on over at the city.
Definitely.
It's hard to be pessimistic about once you get to know the people that are doing the good work there.
This might seem a little like traffic nerd, but when I first got here, I looked around and saw protected bike lanes, complete sidewalks, and was like, okay, so there's some transportation equity work already being started.
Yeah.
So the leaps and bounds that we go as a city to look at different lived experiences is already started in every part of our work.
Yeah.
We just have to elevate it.
Well, and hopefully you feel a synergy, that kind of flywheel energy of once you get going, the more and more engagement. Traditionally, that's what people have found here when they put their energy and weight behind subjects, especially as important as what you're working on. We traditionally, the city and the population of Bend has really rallied behind those types of initiatives, and hopefully your experience is the same.
Yeah.
Well, there's so many other things I want to talk about. Is there anything else that you want to focus on in particular? Initiatives that you're working on that need support or focus or blind spots that we need to be made aware of right away?
Ooh, that's a hard question to answer.
Yeah, it's a big sloppy, lazy question on my behalf.
You're good.
But is there something that that needs light and attention right now?
Supporting spaces like the Human Rights and Equity Commission, the Accessibility Commission, COBAC, just supporting those spaces. I think the folks who are in both of those spaces at this moment, it takes an act of bravery to be on a city commission and engaging with local government.
Yep.
And a lot of these folks are engaging based on identities that they hold or their families or so many different things, which is another set of bravery. And so showing up to those spaces, calling attention to equity or human rights issues that we see around town. And starting the dialogue for new conversations. I think the city can only do so much, but we do have partners who can do so much more. And so being in those spaces, I would hope that folks would be willing to engage.
Yeah, to, where we started, putting yourself in situations where your palms sweat.
Yeah,
It allows us to reflect on who we are, how we're showing up, and how we're conversing with the community members around us.
definitely.
It's an exciting time for Bend. I'm hopeful that we can continue to create a welcoming, diverse community. I think it adds a more vibrant, shared experience
Yeah,
for all of
definitely.
us as we go forward. And it's exciting to see Bend grow up a little bit in this regard.
Yeah.
It's always focused on kind of reinventing our economy. It's the Bend story, let's say for the last 100, 150 years has always been self-determination, reinventing our economy, the grid of creating a community 4 hours from the nearest metro area, self-determination, whatnot. But it's interesting to say, hey, there's more here than that. Like who's telling that story, who's reinventing, who's sitting at the table.
Yeah.
And it's reassuring to me that the city has people, are empowering people like you to move that forward.
Yeah, I think you just hinted at one of the easiest analogies that in the equity field, a lot of us use it. Who's at the table? The next step is, do they feel like they can fully participate?
Yeah. Okay. So not only at the table, but do they feel heard?
Seen, heard, understood, and feel like they can fully engage. And those are the hard questions. And we generally are like, well, we've set the table. All that want to come to the table will come to the table. It's like, well, what barriers are there to get to the table? What barriers are there to keep folks at the table?
And there's no simple, pithy answer to that. It's
No.
it's a very complicated, nuanced, ongoing, complicated discussion that's going to get us there.
We talked about this prior to the interview of you being a social scientist. I think a lot more folks are social scientists than what they think. I frame it from a public health lens because that's where I was. But I think we all have a level of social science. We all think about where we're going to get food to eat, where we're going to, do we have a car? Do we not have a car? If we're going to ride our bike with our kids, can we feel safe? What are those different things that make our community our community? If those are the things that we have to think about on the personal level, how to relate that to the interpersonal and systems connection is that's where I sit. Is the in-between between you as a person and how you experience community, and then how do you interact with the government who's going to continue to build a strong and vibrant city. It's creating that through line to say your individual experience, your human-centered experience can move the way we develop, the way that we grow.
Thank you for laying it out in that way. That really helped me bring it home on where I stand, where the public stands, and how we move through this process together.
Definitely.
That was a very eloquent way to put it. Well, if you don't have anything else that you want to talk about, I actually lifted a quote from your Instagram page.
Which one?
From Adrienne Marie Brown.
Okay, yeah, Adrienne Marie Brown.
And she had a quote about being an irresistible invitation to the future.
Ooh, yeah.
And it's very salient here. I think you're that irresistible invitation to the future in a very challenging time. And I'm glad you're here.
Thank you. I also want to mention the first line of that, which is be kind. And that's the poem itself. The last one is be an irresistible invitation to the future. The first part of that is be kind and speak with a gentle face. So that starts with you being kind to yourself. You did awesome. Thank you for engaging in this conversation. Equity is a rough subject, and it is definitely one of those things that if you're beginning that journey, it can be, again, squiggle talk. It can be all the things that are just, I don't know where I fit in all of this. But thank you for going toe to toe with me and asking these questions about what does that actually look like for Bend residents?
Well, thank you for allowing me to to start the questions from where I stand.
Yeah.
It's a interesting perspective as I try to challenge myself to understand what's more and expand my empathy to the lived experience of those around me. And perhaps I'm late to the game, but it's the environment in which I was brought.
Yeah.
And I don't want to be embarrassed of that. I want to understand where I stand and how we continue to set other places at the table.
Solid. Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for being here. Welcome to Bend.
Yeah.
And I really am excited for you as you open that next chapter of your life with your coming little one.
Thank you. Appreciate it.